Dean and Lydia, thank you so very much for what you provided for us tonight. And thank you for the reminder that there is not only grace, like yesterday you had grace that was sufficient for the day, but it may not have been for, the day that you are experiencing today. You have to have new grace. And what we have found is that God's grace is always timely, it's always sufficient. You can't stockpile it. You can't say, I've got a little extra grace today, I'm gonna save that for tomorrow. You just trust that God, like he promised daily bread, is gonna provide daily grace. What a wonderful truth. Well, tonight we continue on in a Sunday evening series that we began some 3 or 4 weeks ago, and we're trying to answer the question, who am I? I think a lot of people are genuinely, earnestly, in our day and age, they are asking the question, I'm just trying to figure out who I am. And there are answers for that question, and when we rightly come to an accurate conclusion, then our life has something by which it can face the day and face the future and move on successfully. But if we answer that question, who am I, incorrectly, the ramifications are really profound. In fact, if we ask the question, who am I, and we don't establish the answer to that question because we've started with the wrong source, then we are in for what my dad used to say, a world of hurt. So we're asking the question, who am I? We're trying to answer that question from a truth that is available and true for all people, for all places, and for all times. Now, last week, in answering that question, who am I, we answered it with basically a one word, and that is, you are created. We're going to spend a few weeks on this topic of not only who am I, but I am created. We're spending some extra time on this one in particular because it really does have a lot of implications. And so we'll spend a little more time. I'm going to say again this evening, like I believe I said last week at the beginning of the service, I don't pretend to think that I am the most qualified to address this topic. I just know that I am tasked with it. I think this is part of the whole counsel. And because God said, preach the whole counsel, this is part of that whole counsel. So with halting effort and with some reservation, I am going to again address this idea of who am I? I am created. Okay, as we begin, let me ask you this question. How many of you have ever paid more? You knew you were paying more for something than it was worth, but at that moment, it was to you worth it. For example, how many of you have ever bought, a shirt at Disneyland before? Okay, I hear the little mumble like, oh yeah. Okay, how many of you have ever bought a hot dog at a ballpark before? Good night. I mean, seriously, how many of you have bought a hot dog at a ballpark before? Raise your hand. Okay, so you've bought a hot dog at a ballpark. I mean, it's not an exaggeration to say you'd pay, $10 for a hot dog at a ballpark, right? Is a hot dog worth $10? Yes or no? Most of you are saying no. Why did you buy it at the ballpark? I don't know. Okay. I think the answer is because at that moment, you deemed it $10 worth of value. You ascribed some value to something at that moment that you said, I know it's probably not worth $10, but I'm gonna buy a hot dog, and you did so for $10. I mean, we could go on and on. A cup of coffee. Have you ever had a cup of coffee at a place where you're freezing? I mean, just the thought of a hot cup of coffee. And haven't you ever said, I was standing in line, this is interesting, I was standing in line at an amusement park. Okay, I'm not gonna tell you which one it was, but the guy does have big ears. Okay, so I'm standing in line, and I'm early there in the morning because we're trying to get in and do this certain thing. So I'm there early in the morning, and I have a Yeti mug and a hot cup of coffee. And there are people standing all around me, and people are talking about my cup of coffee. I'm like, hey, look at your own stuff. They're looking at my cup, and somebody says like, oh man, you've got the right stuff right there. And then people are like, I tell you, I'd give you $25 for that cup of coffee right now. I'm like, bring it on, buddy, Okay, now why is a person and a cup of coffee, they say, oh, I'd give you $25 for that right now. Why? Well, because at that moment, they have ascribed value to that object at that time. Although, if they were at McDonald's and McDonald's said, that'll be $25 for the large coffee. I mean, what would you do at McDonald's? You'd say, I'm going to Wendy's or whatever, Now, if you were at Starbucks, you might say, wow, 25, okay, $25. Okay, the point I'm trying to make is that we oftentimes ascribe different value to different things at different times. At different times in my life, I have ascribed different value based on my age and stage of life. There was a time in my life when I ascribed a lot of value to playing basketball. Now I know, don't laugh, okay? Some of you are like, oh, seriously? Well, yeah, I loved to play basketball. I still love to play basketball, but at this age and stage in my life, I'm not serious about it. I mean, I'm gonna go out and goof around and maybe I'd play, a 2-on-2 or something, but to run up and down a full court to play basketball, there's a time I would do that all day long. But right now, do I place the same amount of value on playing basketball right now as I would have when I was 18 or 28 or whatever? There was a time when I placed a lot of value. I had different beaters of cars. I mean, my first car was a 69 Plymouth Barracuda. Now that's a cool car if you know anything about them, but that car had as much Bondo filler in it as it did metal, and a duct tape seats and everything, but I valued the car. I got it for $125. And man, I valued that car. I also, after that, I went from a really cool Plymouth Barracuda to a 1976 AMC Pacer. No, yeah, exactly, okay. If you know anything about the AMC Pacer, you know that was akin to a fishbowl on wheels. And I valued it. I mean, I worked on that thing. I did body work on that thing. I put a clutch in that thing with my dad in our, detached garage in the dead of winter with like 6 inches of ice on the floor. I valued it, but would I do that today? I'm like, haul that thing off, okay? The point I'm trying to make is sometimes we ascribe value to religion. I suspect that many people in here ascribe a rather high amount of value to Christianity. The problem with only ascribing value to something is values change, but truth does not. Value is something that you find valuable. We even try at times to teach our kids the value of church and the value of Christianity and the value of our faith. Well, that's fine, but really it's not so important if we find it valuable. It's most important that we conclude it is true. Now, it's fine if you do find something to be true and then you place high value on it. But don't start with value. Start with, is this true? Can I hold on to this? Is this actually worth building my life upon it? Again, there are some that might say, hey, listen, it's fine for you to have religion, and if Christianity is your stripe of religion, then that's fine. Go ahead. You find it valuable. I don't. So it's okay. We can all kind of get along. The problem is, if there is a creator God, and if God did from the very beginning create the world ex nihilo, out of nothing, and he bent down and he forms and fashions mankind out of the dust, the dirt of the ground, and he breathes into man and man became a living soul, then quite frankly, it doesn't matter if you value that or not. It has consequence. We should come to value it, but we should first conclude, is this true? Okay, so with that in mind, I think many times people believe that okay, so if something's valuable, is that something I need to hold on to? Well, in a sense, it's maybe just the value you ascribe to it. let's back up a little bit and say, is it true? Not just true to me, is it true? St. Augustine wrote The City of God, and he is writing about basically two cities. Augustine writes about the city of God, and then he writes about the city of man. And if you live in the city of God, you begin with God as its creator. And everything in the city of God rotates around him as its hub. He also writes about the city of man. Now, the city of man is this place where different things can actually reside on the throne or in the center of that city. In the city of man, he's going to have to create some God, or he's going to have to become God himself. If man is God, or if man is the one who determines who is God, then that is as vacillating and as fluctuating as is man. John Gray's an atheist. He ascribes no understanding that there is a city of God and that a true God resides at its center. But notice what John Gray said. He said, the need for religion appears to be hardwired in the human animal. Atheists are usually just as emotionally engaged as believers. Quite commonly, they are more intellectually rigid. Okay, now what is it that Gray is saying? He's saying that it appears that throughout the billions and billions of years that man has actually evolved, it appears that there's something about the wiring of mankind. And the wiring of mankind is that he is hardwired to worship. I would agree with that. I would disagree with Gray regarding the way that actually was accomplished. But I do agree that mankind is hardwired to worship. In other words, man is going to worship something or someone. So with that being the understanding, are we going to conclude that well, I can just worship whatever I want? Remember, that's pretty, the way Jesus would have said it in his parable of the two houses, that is a really poor foundation upon which to build your life. Think through the worship of man. What does this provide? Think through these passages of Scripture. For they shall soon be cut down like the grass and wither as the green herb. As for man, his days are as grass, as a flower of the field, so he flourisheth. The voice said, cry, and he said, what shall I cry? All flesh is grass, and all the goodliness thereof is as the flower of the field. Whereas ye know not what shall be on the morrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time, and then vanisheth away. Genesis 3:9, for dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. What does the Scripture say about what is man? The Scripture helps us understand what you and I already know, and we know that our lives are so vacillating. They are so given to change. How many of you thought about, now just, I don't care how old you are, I don't care if you're in college, out of college, well beyond, never went to college. How many of you thought that the year of your high school graduation was like an eternity away? How many of you remember that feeling? Okay, I can remember the year of my high school graduation was 1982, okay? It's not funny, okay? So it was 1982. And I can remember, some of you are thinking, yeah, that is an eternity away. But I'm talking about from the other side, okay? From the other side, I am thinking like, when in the world will 1982 ever get here? And then, quite frankly, I wonder, whatever happened to 1982? I mean, I wonder, what happened? I just got married, and I just said I do, and I just bought my first house, and I just traded in that car, and I just went on that trip. And do you know what I have come to conclude? at a mere 56 years of age. I've come to conclude that life is rather vaporous, that it does appear for just a moment and then it vanishes away. No matter how many times young parents are told this, and there's no fault in this, no matter how many times young parents are told, hey, enjoy those days because they're going to be here and they will be gone like that. No matter how many times you hear that, it can't register until those days have gone like that. And you wonder, what happened? It's because our lives are so fleeting. I don't say that to be in any way, shape, or form discouraging, because I'm not. I just wonder, like, wow, I have enjoyed life, but it goes so fast. What's the other side of this vacillating? Appears like the morning grass, and then the sun comes out and it's gone. It's like vapor that comes up, and I can see it, and before I can even focus on it, it's gone. What's the answer? What's the opposite to this? For I am the Lord, I change not. They shall perish, but thou shalt endure. Yea, all of them shall wax old like a garment. As a vesture thou shalt change them, and they shall be changed. But thou art the same, and thy years shall have no end. I am the first and the last, and beside me there is no God. And as a vesture shalt thou fold them up, and they shall be changed. But thou art the same, and thy years shall not fail. What are we trying to say here? We're trying to say that the worship of God, the city of God, not the city of man, is the only place that you can find something that is going to provide something stable, something unchanging, something that will not vacillate, something that is secure. And in contrary fashion, the worship of man, man's religions, his preferences, his desires, is unstable, shifting, and given to change. We could say it this way: if man is in charge, can you definitively tell anyone anything? So think through the question. If man is in charge, if the city of man is where we are to reside, then can anyone tell anyone anything? The answer is you can't, because that's going to change as quickly as does man. But if there is a city of God, if God is creator, then you actually have the ability to tell someone, no, you're wrong. Those are huge words today. We don't want to tell anyone else that they are wrong, and then to make this almost arrogant claim that you are right. But that is what you actually can conclude if there is a city of God. Okay, so clearly no one's religiously neutral. We all are going to worship someone or something. Okay, that being the case, by admitting that there is a God, what are we saying? Well, first of all, by admitting that there is a God, we admit this. We admit that we are not the highest authority when it comes to truth. Okay, what are we admitting? If there's a God, what am I going to say? Well, that means that I'm not the highest authority when it comes to what is true. There has to be then truth existing outside of myself if I can say something is definitively true. What else am I saying? Well, we admit that we don't have absolute authority explaining causes. Okay, if there's a God, then I don't have absolute authority regarding causes, because obviously I wasn't there. What's the first cause, and why did he do that? I don't have absolute authority. Now, the one who does have authority can reveal that, but if I am it, and I'm going to vacillate, if I'm living in the city of man, how in the world can any singular man say, here is the great cause? The conclusion is, well, there really is no great cause. By admitting that there is a God, we admit that we don't have the final authority to define right and wrong. I don't have the final authority to say something is definitively right, something is definitively wrong. If I'm attempting to escape the authority of God, I'm going to try with every ounce of strength I have to make a case against his existence. Does that make sense to you? If I'm trying to live in the city of man, I am going to use every ounce of strength I have to deny the fact. In fact, I will belittle anyone who makes the claim that there is a city of God, with God as its center, God as the great originator, God as the source of all things. I'm going to do everything within my power to refute the claim that there is such a place, the city of God. When man removes God as a starting point, the center of all things, the one who is the author of truth, then God's going to be replaced with gods created by man or with God or with man himself. We're going to find something to fill that center point. One of the spokesmen for this kind of thinking is a guy by the name of Richard Dawkins. I would suspect that most in here have heard the name of Richard Dawkins. Dawkins is a man who vehemently opposes God, and he's not afraid to say it. So that's fine. God has graciously extended to mankind the ability to choose to believe or to not. Dawkins obviously has chosen to not. Dawkins says this. Dawkins said, "It is absolutely safe to say that if you meet someone who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked, but I'd rather not consider that." Okay, now that's Dawkins' claim. He says, if you meet someone and they say, in a sense, I know they wouldn't use these words, but I live in the city of God, the place where God is the center, the originator, the place where all things rotate around him. If you meet a person who says that that's where they live, he said, it is safe to say, because they don't believe in evolution, it is safe to say that person is ignorant, stupid, insane, or wicked, but I'd rather not consider that. So does Richard Dawkins or those holding similar beliefs have faith? That's an important question. Sometimes our problem with what we consider to be the problem of Christianity is, well, boy, it takes a lot of faith. And then remember this morning we talked about at times what the world tries to do is actually shame, so to speak, Christianity. They try to back you in a corner and make you feel inferior because you don't believe in the science of evolution. So does Dawkins or others who hold to his beliefs of evolution, do they in fact have faith? Well, listen to what he said. The fact that life evolved out of nearly nothing. Okay, now please notice the word, the fact. Okay, that's a really important word. The fact that life evolved out of nearly nothing some 10 billion years after the universe evolved out of literally nothing is a fact, there's our word again, is a fact so staggering that I would be mad to attempt words to do it justice. Does Richard Dawkins have faith, yes or no? To me, quite staggering faith. Staggering faith. To believe that some tens of billions of years ago, something happened out of nothing, which he does acknowledge. And then, after something came into existence out of nothing, then something actually looked orderly, designed, like it had purpose, out of nothing. I'm not trying to be unkind, but Dawkins said that my belief in God makes someone like me either ignorant, stupid, or insane, or possibly wicked. It does appear that a person who holds to something that says billions of years ago, something actually happened out of nothing with no explanation, does require a grand amount of faith. Dawkins also said this. He said, faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. Faith is belief in spite of, or perhaps because of, a lack of evidence. That's an interesting statement, isn't it? He says, okay, listen, the way that you have faith, or the reason you have faith is because it's a great cop-out. And faith primarily exists in this environment where you have no facts to back up your belief. Dawkins is making a claim that evolution needs no faith. It's simply scientific conclusions that are based on that which is. If it's scientific, it's both observable and repeatable. Yet the statement about faith seems to contradict what Dawkins says elsewhere. Listen to what else he said. Scientists are required to back up their claims not with private feelings, but with publicly checkable evidence. Their experiments must have rigorous controls to eliminate spurious effects. And statistical analysis eliminates the suspicion, or at least measures the likelihood that the apparent effect might have happened by chance alone. Yet to what incredible lengths are people like Richard Dawkins willing to go simply to deny the possibility of God being the creator of all things? When asked the following question, notice how Dawkins responds. Here's the question. What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution? Okay, that's a fair question, right? Intelligent design. Intelligent design means that if there is something that gives the appearance of design, there must have been some intelligence behind it. Okay, several years ago, we were hiking in Colorado. As we're hiking in Colorado, we were up in this mountainous point, and there was between us and the next mountain this little cutout, this crevasse, so to speak. And we look down here, and I see a pair of glasses down there. Okay, so there's a pair of glasses down there. I crawled down, I picked up the glasses, and what does that tell me? Does it tell me that, wow, how many billions of years did these take to form? This is incredible. Look at is that what it told me? It told me, and I put the glasses on. I actually put them on, I'm like, wow, they were really strong. What does this tell me? I started to look around and I saw a skeleton. No, I didn't see that, okay. What it told me is that somebody lost their glasses, right? Doesn't common sense tell you that? I'm not trying to be overly simplistic, but it tells me that those didn't just happen. There's a lot of arguments that we could use to advance this thought, and we'll do so potentially next week. I don't know if next week, we'll do it in the future, okay? So what we're trying to say is, did this happen by chance alone? What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution? Listen to Dawkins' response. Well, it could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, this is Dawkins, that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto, perhaps this planet. Now that is a possibility, and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of our chemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer, and that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe. But that higher intelligence would itself have to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point. Wow. Is a guy like Richard Dawkins going to incredible lengths to try to explain away the fact that there well could be a creator who in the beginning created the heavens and the earth? Does he have faith, yes or no? The question now that begs to be answered is his faith any more reasonable than yours? Well, saying that there might be some highly advanced alien life form that was really highly advanced and then seeded life onto here. But then, now remember, they must have come from somewhere else too. And then I suspect if we just play this game out and out and out, then they must have come from somewhere else. And behind that, someone else must have come from, and they must have come. Where's the great cause to bring about the incredible effect and that is people like you and me. Is it possible that the incredible attempts to discredit the Genesis account of creation are simply a means to discredit and ultimately to escape from God? Now, this goes back to, who am I? Created. If I'm not created, I don't have to answer to God. But if I am created, then there's a designer, and he has an intent for his design. Okay, so are there those that are just trying to run away from God? Imagine for a moment that you are in a very dark forest. You can't find your way. I mean, the moon is not out, the stars are hid, and wherever it seems like you turn, you run into something else. You are cutting yourself on the thick brush that's all about you. You can't see where you're going. And all of a sudden, you're squinting your eyes, you're looking for anything, and all of a sudden, way off in the distance, you see some light. Which direction are you going to go? Which direction? Well, I suspect that most of you are thinking, well, I'm going to go towards the light. Unless you're guilty. Unless you're running from something. Unless you don't want to answer to someone. And then the very thing that could provide additional light is the thing that you turn from and actually try to escape, even to your own peril or demise. Before we dive into some of the considerations that articulate the claims of creation, I want us to look at the truths of what we would call universal moral law. Universal moral law. That means, again, a phrase that you've heard often. It means that something can be true for all people, all places, and all times. Moral law. It is that which we immediately recognize. Jefferson called it what you and I have heard often, and that is self-evident in the Declaration of Independence. He said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal, that all are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, that all men are granted, seated with, given these unalienable rights. And we find that those rights are self-evident. What Jefferson is saying is he's saying, hey, listen, I don't have to take time to explain this. This does not require, okay, point A, point B, point C. He says, you don't need any of that. He says, we understand intuitively that there are things that we know are universally true. We can't use reason to discover it. We just know it. And all people are given a moral sense of right and wrong. So consider the following truths regarding moral law. Number one, moral law is undeniable. First, we say, well, what is it? Moral law is undeniable. For example, there are really no countries, or we would all agree, that is a really twisted, we would universally agree, that is a perverted people. There's no country where murder is a virtue and gratitude is a vice. C.S. Lewis said it this way in Mere Christianity. He said, think of a country where people were admired for running away in battle, or where a man felt proud of double-crossing all the people who had been the kindest to him. You might just as well try to imagine a country where 2 and 2 made 5. Let me ask you this. Are we living in a day where people actually have a hard time saying definitively that 2 and 2 truly does equal 5? We're living in that day, but you and I intuitively know that it exists. So what he's saying is there is something about truth, moral law, that is undeniable. What else do we know about it? Number 2, we know moral law exists by our reactions. Okay, while many attempt to deny that there is any moral law, no, you can't really definitively say that right is right and wrong is wrong. That is quickly dissolved. It's quickly proven that's not true. That there is moral law when you treat people in a way that violates their understanding of right and wrong. Okay, let's use it this way. When we recognize every year now 9/11. Now I realize there may be several in here that weren't alive there, but you're aware of the fact that terrorists flew planes into buildings that eventually collapsed. They flew one into the Pentagon. They flew one crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. And there was moral outrage against the terrorist activities that were done. Moral outrage, right? And do we universally agree that this was a wrong done to a people? Well, you might say, well, if I was Osama bin Laden, if I was for him, I would have found that very act quite agreeable. In fact, I might have been dancing in the street. True, but not if that had been done to you. See, Osama bin Laden would have had the same reaction. In fact, he would have used it as his moral justification. Well, I'm doing this in response to what the United States have done to us. So you understand there is a moral consistency, a moral understanding of the rightness or the wrongness. He's just saying, yeah, I'm glad it happened to you, but if that very thing had happened in a sense to him, great moral outrage. Do you know what we're trying to say? We know moral law exists by our reactions. The third thing we notice about moral law, truths regarding it, number 3, moral law is the unchanging standard of justice. Moral law, okay, I have a creator. Who am I? I'm created. What does this mean? It means that there is an unchanging standard of justice. It doesn't change for one person to the next, one people group to the next. There's a universal standard of justice. One of the atheistic arguments is that God is unjust, and his injustice and God cannot coexist. It's why I don't believe in God. Have you ever heard people say, well, if there's a God, why do so many bad things happen? Why is there so much injustice in the world? If there truly is a God, then why is there so much injustice in the world today? Have you ever heard that argument? Okay, well, one of the things we understand is moral law is the unchanging standard of justice. Again, let's go back to C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis, again, in Mere Christianity, he was one of those atheists, by the way. C.S. Lewis was the person who said, I just don't believe that there is any God. I'm an atheist, and one of the reasons he had against God was injustice. If there is a God, why does so much injustice happen? Listen to what C.S. Lewis said. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? Interesting. Do you know what he said? He said, well, there can't be a God because of injustice. Wait a minute. How do I actually know what justice looks like to call something else unjust? And how do we universally know? How does everybody know that something is universally right and something is universally wrong? Number 4, since we can know what is absolutely wrong, there must be an absolute right. In September of 2000, Alan Dershowitz, an agnostic, was debating Alan Keyes on the subject of religion. And someone in the crowd asked this question, what makes something right? Simple question, what makes something right? Dershowitz praised the question, and then he answered like this. We know what evil is. We have seen it. He then cited examples like the Holocaust and Crusades. Then he raised his voice and said passionately to the audience, I don't know what's right. I know what's wrong, but I have something else to tell you folks. You don't know what's right. The minute you think you know what's right, the minute you think you have the answer to what's right, you have lost a very precious aspect of growing and developing. I don't expect ever to know precisely what's right, but I expect to devote the rest of my life trying to find out. Let me tell you, that is a sad place to be. And I would argue that it is undeniably impossible to say, I know what is wrong, without concurrently saying, I only know what is wrong because I know what is right. Where did you get that from? I submit you got that from a creator. And number 5, if there were no moral law, then we wouldn't make excuses for violating it. If there were no absolute universal moral law, we would make no excuses for violating those moral laws. Today, in our culture, there is a huge call for tolerance. Tolerance. Okay, let me ask you this. Is there a huge call for tolerance of traditional marriage? Is there a huge call from the world? We need to be tolerant of traditional marriage. Is that the call today? Do you know, even the shout that the world gives today for, well, you just need to be tolerant of, what are they asking for tolerance? I would submit if you start using that line of reasoning and just start inserting different things, the only thing that the world is shouting, clamoring for regarding tolerance is that which is understandably, universally wrong. That's what they're saying, give us tolerance. But not those things that are universally, understandably right. What did we understand about moral law? If there were no moral law, we wouldn't make excuses for violating it. Okay, so to wrap this up, where does it leave us? It points us to the fact that there has to be a starting point. This is important for all of us today. What we hold to, what Campus Church holds to, should not be something we hold to only because it's our preference or because we value it. It should be held onto only because it is true. It should be held on to only because there is a starting point, and that starting point is God. Arthur Eddington conducted experiments that were connected to Einstein's theory of relativity. It's more than we're going to take time to jump into, but listen to what he said. He said this. He said, philosophically, the notion of a beginning of the present order of nature is repugnant to me. I should like to find a genuine loophole. Now, do you know what he's saying? He's saying, I don't want to find out that there actually was a starting point. What Einstein was trying to prove, many believe, what Einstein was trying to prove, in fact, his theory of relativity, most think he fudged on some things early on before it was actually corrected. Now, that's still one of those things that people are debating today, but they think he fudged on those. In fact, he called it himself one of his greatest blunder. Einstein was trying to say that the universe is static, that everything in the universe has always existed. But when people started to evaluate the theory, they really concluded Einstein's original theory, and that is, there's a starting point. Let me ask you, who is the starting point? When you answer that question with well, there is none, it just happened, you have a lot of explaining to do. But quite frankly, and I'm not trying to take the easy road, I'm trying to take what I consider to be the biblically honest road, and that is there is a starting point, and that starting point is God. Why doesn't a guy like Eddington want to have some place of beginning? Why does he want a loophole? Because if there's a beginning, there's someone who actually originates the beginning. And if there's someone who originates the beginning, I'm answerable to him. Answerable to him. What does it matter that we're created? It means that there's a creator, and we're answerable to him. I don't suspect that Einstein claimed any form of Christianity. But in 1905, in an interview with Esther Salomon, Einstein said, I want to know how God created this world. I'm not interested in this or that phenomenon, in the spectrum of this or that element. I want to know his thoughts. The rest are details. You can know his thoughts. It's found in a book that we refer to as the Bible. And it begins with, in the beginning, God created. Who am I? You are created. Father, thank you for truth that resonates with life. Lord, these are not isolated things. These are not some obscure or some small elements of something that people are holding on to, trying to find some meaning in life. These are things that resonate with everyone. And it comes from you. Lord, continue to help us to see the relevance of who we are by answering that question with, we are created. We're purposeful. There's an intent. There's a meaning. There are genuine answers for life. And they sing with everything that we see about us. Continue to frame our thoughts in line with yours, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a great evening.